Welcome to another episode of Red and Black, where conservatism is not just the color that you're used to. I'm Lenny McAllister, and unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about color a lot more than we'd like to again in America, based on what transpired in Buffalo this time last week. And Priscilla, I'm going to go to you first, just to kind of get your initial thoughts on what you thought when you heard about what happened, and just kind of what went through your mind. And from there, we'll kind of dig into all the national, political, cultural ramifications. But first, on a human level, what was going through your mind when you heard about this?
It's so traumatizing to hear that someone would, do something so horrific to innocent people. When I hear about these tragedies at places of worship, at schools, going to the grocery store, these types of things shouldn't happen. And I was so saddened by this news. And then when I heard more details, I was even more distraught because, it's people are so troubled and they're buying into some really whacked out ideology, but to really plan to drive 200 miles to take someone's life that's innocent for no reason. I mean, it's just unthinkable. And so my heart goes out to the people there in Buffalo and New York and all over the United States who are just afraid now.
Jeff, I'm going to ask you a different question on this, which is going to be, what were your thoughts thinking about this tragedy when you first started seeing the reactions on social media, which of course can be a wide range of different types of reaction, both snarky and serious, reflective, and unfortunately opportunistic?
Well, I mean, that last word that you just used, that's it. I mean, I was seeing that on social media, but I mean, that's even true of the broader political conversation. I mean, I wasn't surprised that this attack happened, and I'm sure we'll delve into that. But it's just, to me, it's depressing. I was really depressed to see it, and I even said on Twitter, like, I'm so exhausted by these conversations, because every time something like this happens, nobody ever wants to have an honest conversation about racial issues in America. They only want to tell part of the story and the part that benefits their agenda. This stuff is going to keep happening. And I hate saying that. I really do. I don't want this to happen. But as long as we're not willing to be honest about why these things are happening and about race in America just in general, I mean, there's no way that it can happen. There's no way we can have a solution. And the powers that be, the ones who drive a lot of these conversations, they are incentivized to keep us at each other's throats and to keep us hating each other and to keep us ignoring the root issues of these problems, whether it's this guy in Buffalo or even with some of the ones that are carried out by Black people. Like, as long as we just go to our respective corners and our respective echo chambers, we're going to keep seeing this. So, I mean, I don't know. It's hard. It's gotten hard for me to talk about this stuff because honestly, I don't know if there will be a solution anytime soon. At some point, we have to get tired of it, but we're not there yet.
Dr. Metzler, I was thinking about going to you and asking you about this from a legal perspective, but I think instead, I kind of want to ask you, what went through your mind as you reflected upon this within the first 24 to 48 hours from a cultural perspective? Because you're the one that has not only seen it as an American citizen, seen it as an immigrant, but you've also taught it as a professor, right? And you've taught it from both law and from politics and from like a sociology, social studies, cultural perspective. Through that very multifaceted lens that you possess, what went through your mind the first 24 to 48 hours after this all went down?
Well, the first thing was I thought immediately, not again. That was the first thing I thought. Then, as I was going through this, immediately I'm thinking, who is most likely to be in that grocery store? And it was exactly what I thought. So you have old Black women whose job it is to uphold the Black community. They were most likely to be the victims. So from that perspective, I was just like, oh my goodness, nah, and in fact, it was the older black women and men that were in fact killed. Then I thought about the fact that when you look at a number of these communities, you don't have major grocery stores or chain stores in those communities because they've decided it's not really worth it. And so to have a place like Tops, which really helped the community and filled a need, and then I'm thinking, well, I hope they don't decide to pull out after this because the issue of food insecurity would be even worse. And so all of those kinds of things just were happening at the same time. And there was an emotional response just thinking of the elderly folks in my family. And so as a result of that, it was, and to just point, it's just exhausting. I'm thinking, I am exhausted with this already.
And so I keep saying that 2020 was our 1968 moment from this generation, just minus the assassinations. I mean, and people will say that George Floyd was an assassination. Assassinations happen with political leaders and cultural leaders and heads of state. So you didn't have the assassinations of 65 with Malcolm X or 68 with RFK and JFK, or JFK in 63, RFK and MLK in 68. And it's a darn shame that you can sit here and just flip out all these assassinations between Medgar Evers and you just go on and on and on. We don't quite have that, but we do have this new phenomenon that's going on here in the 20th century. And it seems to have gone past 2020, much like COVID-19 has continued on in its variants. We're having these variants of racial animus and cultural back and forth. And I'm going to throw it out to everybody on here. There's been a lot of finger pointing. I mean, Tucker Carlson and replacement theory and Fox News and OANN and Newsmax and, conservative radio. I mean, if the late Rush Limbaugh would still be alive, Rush Limbaugh would be at the top of this list too, right? But can we assign a blame to an ideology? And there, of course, are some that would say yes. Of course, there are some that would say, no, it's just the individual. But I'd like to think that the truth is somewhere in between, because after all, the assailant was 18 years old. We all know that the human brain's not fully formed until the age of 25. So you have a highly impressionable person who's not even fully there to make their own thoughts, that thought enough to pre-plan this type of mass murder. There's got to be this cross blend of personal accountability, because they're old enough to be tried as an adult and drive a car, to Tops to commit this heinous act, but then they're also 18 years old and impressionable.
Yeah, I think it's a very dangerous ideology that this young man has subscribed to, this fear that's been percolating in him, just to be afraid of brown skin. I mean, it's being fed from somewhere. I mean, I did my history on France and where this replacement ideology has come from. I think it's a stretch for the Democrats to accuse Republicans of perpetuating a form of this. Although I do think we need to take it seriously, because if that's the perception that's being given out there, that we as Republicans and conservatives have our own form of this, I think it's something to talk about and be serious about. But I don't see Republicans advocating for people to go out and kill, people based on the color of their skin. All I've seen policy-wise is Republicans want legal immigration, things to be done correctly, and for immigrants to be vetted and to go through the process, and and have a legalized process. And quite frankly, I've heard Democrats say the same thing. So we can't just pinpoint this and say, oh, this is a right-wing issue that's perpetuated this crazy behavior that's coming from France. So I would like to make that distinction, but regardless, it's very serious when you get in front of young minds and they're very impressionable. I'm a public school teacher. I see how easy it is to manipulate young minds. And if you're a white man and all you hear is President Biden saying, like, you're the number one terrorist in the country and you're horrible and you're bad and you're an oppressor and everything's negative based on your skin color, you know, that can create fear in a young man to perpetuate him possibly to do something crazy like this. I'm not sure what his history is that would cause him to go this far, but obviously this is a movement. It's a small movement. Hopefully that, you know, our government can get it contained. But I do find it extremely hypocritical when I hear Joe Biden say that we need to get rid of white supremacy when I've got the receipts of his white supremacy for decades as a legislator. It's really offensive to me. I don't think he should be the spokesperson to decide how to talk about this issue.
Dr. Metzer, what do you think about where we are right now, as far as whether it's less about assigning blame, but more about assigning who should be the problem solvers, who should be the solution makers, who should be the people to bridge over this? Because there's a generation now that believes that we're never going to get past anything like this. They can point back every 20 years, every 30 years. There's a George Floyd, there's a Rodney King, there's a Watts riots, there's a Harlem riots, there's lynching after World War I, there's lynching after World War II. And they sit there, and there's the Tulsa bombings, Black Wall Street. They sit there and they say, there's always been violence against Black people. America kind of says that they want it to be eradicated. It has another cycle of coming back. It's been rooted in the politics and the policy and the culture. And there's a generation that's giving up on us ever having racial reconciliation.
Well, so first, let's go back to replacement theory. I don't know if you remember when there were the riots in France. Initially, when there were those riots in France, at that point, I was working with a culture minister who was about to go out and issue statements about that. Now, in France, you can't characterize, it is illegal, given their history, to mention issues of race. What he did was he went out and said, you know, we shall seek out the thugs in the suburbs. Well, you know, as we may or may not know, that in fact, primarily the immigrants and people of color in France are the ones who are in the suburbs. And, you know, the folks who can afford it live actually in the city. It is tracing that in which replacement theory, I don't know that it started there necessarily, but there was a lot of that going on during that period of time. I see replacement theory, I think, is something that in fact we need to understand. We don't want to understand, but we need to understand. And until we detangle these issues from politics and have a conversation about the substance of it, rather than the continuous need to run in front of the camera and say, oh, well, you know, this is based on this. No, it's not. And see, there is a fundamental problem globally, but specifically in America, that continues today, which is the issue of race. But we are not talking about it. We want to hold the Bear Summit. We want to have the President's Commission on Race. None of that has solved anything. So until we get out of the political veneer, you know, the hope for reconciliation, so to speak, is just not going to happen.
But Dr. Metzer and Jeff, let me ask you, and then Dr. Metzer chime in as well, of course, Priscilla, but it doesn't seem as though there are any politicians that want to be policymakers to really drive meaningful legislation to really start going after this. I mean, we can make the case that, you know, something like school choice to fix the education system. You can have a good public school system, but you can also have choice for parents. Democrats are on the wrong side of history for that. You know, we have seen where Republicans seem to have locked away certain aspects of voting rights, including early voting in certain key states that have gone from being red to purple. One can make the case that Republicans have been on the wrong side of that. you can make the case that both political parties, Jeff, over the course of American history, have both been on the wrong sides of racism, and that racism, regardless of what people say now, try to make it seem as though it's always been a conservative trait or a Republican trait. No, racism has been an American feature as part of the operating system.
Yeah.
America was founded, and if we're going to fix the bug, we need to fix the bug and not assign it to one branch of the country, but assign it to all of us to be something that we have to address.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Metzler hit it on the head. This is not a political thing because the government can't solve this problem. This is a cultural, societal issue.
Yeah.
And Lenny, earlier you brought up ideology. I think that's part of the cultural and societal issue. The only thing that government can really do is to maybe figure out how these people are getting radicalized and find ways to stop it, find ways to protect us, catch them before they do what they do. That's the government's role. But as far as the ideology that leads up to that, that's for us to fix. And I think that now we're so politicized that when anything happens, we're like, I mean, I can almost see white conservatives saying, I hope that wasn't a white conservative that did that. And then on the other end too, black people have been doing that for ages, because they know that depending on how it shakes out, who the identity of the person is going to dictate the narrative. This guy that carried out this attack doesn't even identify as a Republican or a Democrat. He identifies as a moderate leftist authoritarian. He hated Fox News. He hated Tucker Carlson. He hated Trump. And you know what? They all do. They all tell you that in their manifestos. So we got to stop making this stuff political. Anybody who says that it's Tucker Carlson's fault or Trump's fault or Elise Stefanik, they're either lying or they don't really understand this issue. The reason I said I wasn't surprised is because I know how this stuff works. I know about the forums that these people congregate in and the stuff they talk about, 4chan, 8chan. They're not getting this stuff from Fox News. They're getting it online. And the guy even said he was radicalized online. Just by the way, just like ISIS recruits for the Islamic State. It's the same principle. These guys recruit people online. And when you read the manifesto, when you read a lot of what they say, it's all a sense of victimhood, us versus them. This goes for everybody. I know people on the right always say that black people are into victimhood. No, everybody is. White people are too. There is a such thing as white victimhood, and it leads to attacks like this. When you see a black person who engages in political violence, it's usually because of victimhood, because they feel like they're being put upon by the system. So until we're able to sit down and have cultural, honest conversations, there's nothing that can be done. The government can't. The government can do very little to stop this. I mean, and just really quick too. I don't filibustering, but I was in a Twitter Spaces yesterday, and somebody said, in response to this, why hasn't Biden or Democrats pushed for hate crime legislation for black people just like they did for Asians? And I said, you know what? I'm actually glad that they didn't, because what would have happened if they passed hate crime legislation specifically for black people, then we become complacent. Oh, okay, they passed that legislation. We're all good. No, none of that stuff works. None of that. There's still hate crimes happening against Asians. It's not going to fix the problem. We got to figure out what we need to do as a community, black, white, and otherwise, to protect ourselves, but also to address the types of ideology that leads to these types of tragedies.
And again, one can make the argument, folks, that these type of tragedies are just symptoms of the greater cause, because if you have these inequities that are still baked into the cake of America, where you're still having people that are locked outside of opportunity, not outside of results, and that's what people forget. If you're saying that you need guaranteed equal results, then that's communism, that's socialism, that is domination from on high, and that makes everybody poor, that makes everybody not an equal citizen in the sense that everybody's oppressed. But when you're talking about equal access to opportunity, the ability to have that pursuit of happiness that's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Constitution, everybody. It's in the Declaration of Independence. When you start talking about that and going towards those solutions, that's where the polluted waters of where we've been as a country really start bubbling up. It becomes very hard, Priscilla, for people to have those honest conversations. We always talk about we need to have these honest conversations within our country, but nobody wants to do that. We just got done talking about CRT. And part of the CRT philosophy is that American racism has touched every aspect of American society somewhere in American history. Housing, education, jobs, economy, where people lived, what people can do, what jobs people could apply to, what political offices people could apply to, if they could serve into the military. I can do this forever. What stores they can shop at, where they can drive, if they can be in a town when the sun went down. Every single aspect of American society has been touched significantly by American racism at some point in time, and the fingerprints of that still permeate throughout American society today. But that statement in and of itself, with a certain segment of Americans, is explosive. It is threatening. It is seen as being in and of itself racist against white people. And if you can't even say that very honest and historically proven statement, how in the world can you talk about racism that bubbles up in Buffalo and the subtle and not so subtle causes that lead to that, and then move past that and all the emotion and all the hurt from there, Priscilla, to get to actual solutions to be a more perfect union?
Yeah, to Jeff's argument, this racial fatigue, I mean, every time we turn on the news, there's something happening in the news, and we're reminded of our skin color and our differences in our race. And it's strange. The way I grew up in my generation, it seemed like we were getting closer to Martin Luther King's dream. It seemed like there was a period of time where I never had to actually think about my race. I might have been living in a bubble. It could have just been because I grew up in a military family and I was around people from all over the world, and it was just the culture in the military that we were very, very international, and so race wasn't the number one thing. It was like, what were you able to do? It's the same thing as being a musician. Can you play? Are you a good musician? That's what I care about. I don't care about your race, your religion, or whatever. But now it seems like it's thrown in our face all the time. And part of that, to Jeff's argument, is that social aspect. We're constantly reminded of our differences, and we're constantly reminded that who's the oppression Olympics, like who's going to get more, who's going to get retribution. And I think that constant reminder is what's breeding and feeding this fear in different communities. It's not just in the white community that's afraid. There are other the Black community is afraid. We're battling, the abortion conversation where our population is low to begin with. And that's another thing that puzzled me with this whole thing. It's like, oh, I'm afraid of the Black population. Well, if anybody's done their homework, they would see that the Black population isn't the population to be afraid of, because, we haven't really grown in the United States as far as our percentage goes for hundreds of years. So, and then we talk about how many of our people actually vote and are informed about the things that are going on. And so that number drops significantly. So I'm just perplexed at this group of people who are white supremacists, who think that they can drive 200 miles and take out a Black community simply because of their fear of something that's not even a reality. That's pretty scary. So, but I'm so tired of this. And you're right, there's no legislating racism. You can't legislate someone's behavior. There are no consequences for this, because it's going to continue to happen until we heal and have a healthy society, which I don't see happening anytime soon. We have a lot of changes that we have to make.
But Dr. Metzler, isn't there something that could be done though, folks, from a policy standpoint?
No, but Jeff just said it. Jesus. I mean, seriously.
But that becomes a completely different endeavor, because if you're talking about the second coming, the rest of this stuff's irrelevant anyway. So I know people, I get that, but one, not everybody's going to accept Jesus. When people didn't accept Jesus when Jesus was walking the earth. So the only other time that the answer is going to be Jesus is if Jesus comes from the clouds and the second coming is here, and we're in the days of Revelations, and that's that.
Well, one more thing before I forget, the whole gun thing, because that's coming from like, oh, we've got to legislate guns. That's not going to solve the problem either. So, the way I feel like some legislators want to try to fix this problem is not going to fit. You can legislate and legislate and legislate all you want, but it doesn't change, the radical recruitment that happens in certain segments of the population.
One could make the argument, though, Priscilla, and I'll throw it to the guys real quick. I mean, one could make the argument that a whole lot of legislation from the 1960s did tamp down the Klan and did open doors for African Americans, and then did start leveling the playing field. So yeah, I mean, we forget. I just got done reading the book "The Movement Made Us" by David Dennis. That "The Movement That Made Us" by David Dennis, Davidson College alum as well. And you know, when you think about the violence that Black folks went through, particularly in the South, and particularly places such as Mississippi in the 50s and the 60s, legislation started eradicating that, started getting the Klan out of being so prominent in those areas, and allow Black people to at least start climbing the rungs of success in areas where they didn't even know there was they knew a ladder existed, but they couldn't reach it for decades prior to that. So I mean, there's something to be said about the role of policy and legislation in government to ensure equality. And Dr. Metzler, isn't that where maybe a conservative could actually look at government and say, there's a role for government. There's at least supposed to be a protection of God-given rights. And this is part of where a constitutional conservative could at least make peace with, okay, the government may have to do a little bit more to kind of get us back on track as a country.
Well, first of all, with legislation, a lot of this stuff, the laws are already on the books. Here's the problem I have with this. Every time something comes up, then we want to do a reactionary piece of legislation. That's the problem. A lot of this stuff is already on the books, but we feel we need to have this special piece of legislation to address X, Y, and Z. It's already there. That's number one. Number two, to the point of constitutional conservatives. Listen, the major part of the problem is for constitutional conservatives and for a number of people, both on the left and on the right, we don't understand that government is supposed to have a limited role. We don't want to do any of this work ourselves. We want government to do it. And until we step back from that brink, we are in huge trouble because the government does not live in our communities. They're not there every day. They're not seeing what's going on. So from my perspective, number one, enforce the laws that already exist. To the extent that there are holes that needed to be fixed, do that. The other thing is, we, from a government policy standpoint, have still not figured out the internet and cyberspace and how we can police that, not police it from the standpoint of suppression, but what tools can we use? Now, as it relates to this particular case, all those private chat rooms, et cetera, where he invited people to come in and preview what he was going to do, you better bet that the FBI is tracking down each and every one of those persons to see whether they participated, whether they helped him, all of those kinds of things. So, you know, we as citizens of this country have to take responsibility and stop continuously putting it on the government. And the final thing I'll say is people are like, well, let's not politicize this. It's political. Let's stop.
Politics is the nature of the people. But I do want to ask the question to you two first. I'll bring Priscilla back in just a second, which is government should have a role somewhere in this. It may not need to have the overarching role.
Right.
I think that's where probably Republicans, Democrats, conservative, liberals may disagree. There should be a role for this, because if government is in existence and it cannot protect God-given rights, then the Constitution is toilet paper. The whole purpose of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and everything therein is supposed to be protection of God-given rights by the U.S. government. Even when, and this is, everybody says, but the 10th Amendment, but the Constitution of the United States is supposed to protect God-given rights even if a state is trying to deny those God-given rights.
Yep.
Jeff, there's got to be a role somewhere where a 21st century federal government, state government, local government can appropriately, and that's the key adjective, can appropriately be involved to ensure that we can get back on track from a racial standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, because the more we grow and the more we have issues with immigration, the more we have this interconnected society globally, the more we better figure this out before we have something much worse than 10 people at a supermarket dying, because heck, all it takes is one Russian, Yahoo, one Russian extremist that comes over with a dirty bomb. And now you're not just talking about a racial incident. I mean, let's remember we had some separatists that were involved in the Boston Marathon bombing.
Yep.
You had, that could have, let's make that out to be the Atlanta Marathon, and they wanted to target a higher amount of African Americans running in a marathon instead of it being in Boston. Now you have race and an international incident combined in one. We're not that far away from something like that, unfortunately.
I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, and even your point earlier about how there was legislation that cracked down on the KKK, that's also true. I would also say, though, remember what Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. American society had rejected the KKK. So the government did, contribute to their downfall, definitely. But I don't think the government could have done that if America was still propping them up. I still maintain that it's more of a cultural solution, but when it does come to the government, you're right. They are supposed to protect our rights. They are supposed to protect our right to life. I mean, what Dr. Metzel was talking about with the FBI, looking into those chat rooms, yeah, that's what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know that legislation could make them more effective at that. Now, if there is a way they can do that, then go ahead and pass those laws, as long as they're not trying to use it as an excuse to violate our First Amendment rights.
And to that point, Jeff, that's where, and we could talk about elections, and we'll get to that in a second. That's where you have to have good lawmakers that pass good laws and good policies, but you also have to have altruistic lawmakers and politicians that want the good for the will of the people, and a spirit of Americanism that reflects the best of a republic, not the will of a democracy, which is a very big difference. And I think that's part of the features of America is we're a republic, but people don't think we are. So they want to do what the majority says, not what the best of what we should end up being in place.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is the way it should be. I would say good luck. I mean, I wish it were that way, because that is how it should be. At this point in 2022, I don't have a whole lot of faith in that. So even when I was discussing this with people yesterday, they're talking. They brought the hate crime legislation, and they brought up other governmental solutions. But most of the solutions, and these were all Black people reacting to what happened, and most of those solutions had to do with things that we need to do as a people to protect ourselves. And I even said, the chances of me being attacked by a white supremacist are minuscule. But if that were to happen, it's not the government that's going to maximize my chances of getting out of that alive. What's going to maximize my chances is my Smith & Wesson. So I think as a community, we need to take it upon ourselves to do what we need to do. If there could be a silver lining from this, more Black people, responsible Black people, getting armed, taking steps to protect their communities. One person even mentioned having private security patrol a lot of our neighborhoods. They're doing that in San Francisco because of their skyrocketing crime rates. Why can't Black people do that exact same thing? I think I would say the bulk of our solutions are going to come from us and not from the government. I mean, what the government can do, I mean, if there's ways to get them to do it better, fine, as long as they're not violating our rights. But even with the FBI doing a top-notch job, and I know that there's a lot of good people in the FBI trying to figure this stuff out, there's always going to be something that slips through the cracks. So we need to be able to, as a culture, to tamp down on the ideology, to have these conversations that minimize the hate, but also have ways to protect ourselves. I see most of the solution being with the American people, not so much the government.
Priscilla, let me go to you on this, because let's tie what happened in Buffalo and all the conversations about race and culture and division in America to the elections that we just had in several states on Tuesday. Did you feel any encouragement from what transpired on Tuesday and the aftermath therein that we might be finding at least some people or some renewed confidence, something that says the glue that makes America America is starting to come back into place? Because it's been gone since probably 2000. I mean, people want to take it back to Trump, and you can on different reasons, and people want to take it back to Obama, and you can for another set of reasons. But if you really want to start talking about people not trusting, government and the process with this generation, it goes back to the 2000 election. And one can make the argument that once Nixon resigned in 1974, people just stopped trusting the presidency and government quite the same way again. Between Vietnam and the presidential resignation in 74, we've been dealing with people looking at the government different ever since, and that just got kicked up again with the Clinton controversy and then the 2000 election.
Well, unfortunately, the government has given us plenty of reasons not to trust them. I mean, every time we hear a report and it's verified that there's some impropriety or dishonesty, every time we see actions of an administration and the decisions in foreign policy and domestic policy, it just breaks down the trust. And so what we are seeing is a surge of everyday people, we the people, saying, I'm going to run for office because I want to represent my community. And it should be that way. We need to have term limits. I think term limits could fix a lot of the problems that we're seeing in DC. And yes, I'm encouraged. I might not always agree with some of the beliefs of certain candidates, but that irregardless, is that a word? Irregardless?
Nope.
Regardless.
Okay.
Regardless, I am energized by people being more aware and talking to their neighbors and going on social media and tweeting and retweeting and asking for clarification. I can't tell you, I know all of us are in the same position where people will tweet stuff to us, a headline, and then you go, well, can you give me the name of the bill so I can actually read the bill before I comment? And then you go to the bill, if they can actually name the bill, and it has nothing to do with the headline. So, but people are actually doing their homework and they're asking questions. They're not taking things just at face value. And with these elections that are happening, it's not about, they don't care who endorsed you. People don't care anymore, because the most important thing for a candidate to do is get your endorsement, you as an individual, as a voter. And for me personally, I've gotten past the whole who's endorsing you, because people have their own agendas behind why they endorse somebody or why they'll take an endorsement. What I want to know is what you've been about and what you plan to do. And that's one of the reasons why I think Cawthorn, I know we didn't name him specifically. There are a lot of reasons why he lost his re-election bid, but he went to DC and he was a megaphone for the far right, but he didn't pass a single piece of legislation in 2 years. And Republicans are going to put up with that.
But I get that. But a lot of people don't pass legislation in 20 years or, 25 years, Dr. Metzler, you know what I'm talking about.
But they don't have pictures in lingerie either.
Well, that's true. But
I
digress on that one. Jeff, go ahead and drink, and everybody else out there, you can go ahead and drink. I know it's been a very somber episode. She didn't bring wine.
Dang.
Wow.
I did.
It's hardcore.
I feel you. So, but I guess the question I want to go back to for all of you all, and for you all in the chat room, you can throw this out there as well. And I know we didn't tell you that the like, share, and subscribe, but it pretty somber week.
Yeah.
With the election, were there people that seemed to be inspiring, or were we just more going down the path of where we already are? Are we entrenching even further into the very things that have created America, these conditions where America has run into a ditch. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, since 2020 kicked off, there's been a hell of a lot of stuff that has run America into the ditch, and we haven't quite gotten out. And every time we make a step, it ends up seeming like the old Paula Abdul song, one step forward, two steps back. So where are we now? What did the election help that at all? Getting us through the primary process, or is this just, get ready because it's going to be one whale of a battle in November?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. Look, I was not at all on either side inspired by the folks who are moving forward. From my perspective, look, here's the thing. I like the fact that people who are not your traditional politicians are running for office. That I like. However, what you then have is people running for office for the express purpose of clout chasing. And that is so evident from this election. Dr. Oz, as a conservative, a Republican, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, in the trifecta, a conservative,
Oh,
a
yeah, the whole
Republican,
state of Pennsylvania.
and a Pennsylvanian, because that's even a stretch. But
Yeah, that's right. He doesn't even live there. I mean, it's like, what are we doing? So I like the fact that but again, I think we're going down a more dangerous rabbit hole. We were all just talking about how we need politicians who can look at policy. Of all the folks so far who are moving forward, I don't see it. I don't see it. I see folks who are trying to prop themselves up. I see folks who are still talking about 2020. And, I'm sitting there thinking, so the Republican running for governor from Pennsylvania, gas prices are high, baby formula. You say nothing about that in your acceptance speech. Instead, you're talking about CRT and transgender bathrooms. All of that is fine. However, how am I going to pay my bills?
and a North Carolina incumbent governor,
Yes.
and incumbent mayor of Charlotte, and each one of them in different parties lost their next races playing around with transgender bathroom issues.
Yeah.
So that's not the brightest thing to do from there. And Jeff, yeah, there's something to be said about the citizen politician. But I think one of the things that they don't bring into play, and this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment to somebody we all know and love, and Dr. Metzler probably knows where I'm going with this, but there's not enough people that know how to be generalists in these roles. They are specialized on one issue and can't work outside that silo, Jeff. So if there's citizen politicians without experience, they know one thing and they're chasing clout, that just creates more silos. We end up being a city full of silos and not a united community. And that ends up, again, exacerbating problems that we've been trying to go through now for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, I started out this year being afraid of that exact thing. I mean, I even wrote an article saying the primary season will probably be even more important than the general election, because it matters who we send out there to get into Congress. I honestly, I don't want a Republican Congress full of MTGs. I mean, she serves her role, whatever, but I want people who are going to, I want people who are going to go to Washington who have substance, who at least know their stuff, or at least have people around them who can help coach them on it. And I want to see some legislation passed. I want to see some legislation repealed. I want to see some stuff get addressed. I want people to go in there meaning business and ready to do business. I get with Biden in the White House, that might make it hard, but we're going to get the presidency in 2024. So when that happens, I don't want to see a repeat of what we've seen so many times in the past where we elect these people and they go in there and do nothing.
But Jeff, let's just be honest. We don't like Republicans that try to work with Democrats because we call them rhinos. We call them squishy. We say that they compromise principles and they don't know how to stick to their principles. But then we complain about not getting anything done because people can't work across the aisle and bring people along. There used to be a time, and Dr. Metzler can probably attest to this, because he, when he was back talking to George Washington about the founding of the country, there was an anti-political party sentiment, because political parties create these factions where people don't want to talk to the other side. And the way the government has been formed, the way it was written, was a republic where the majority and the minority had their basic constitutional rights always respected, and there has to be some type of give and take to move the ball down the field. We don't even try to do that anymore. We're just, I just got to go get a bigger hammer to hit you over the head, and you go get a club, and I'll go get a bigger club. So where do we, and I'm not going to put all the blame at conservative thought, because that's one, what the mainstream media tries to do. And number two, it's not true, because this happens on the other side as well. When do we get back to a point in time where it's okay to not know everything? It's okay to have friends on both sides. It's okay to be a deal broker, as long as you're moving the ball down the field with your principles still in tow, even if you don't get everything you want.
Now, this is a perfect public service announcement, what you both are talking about, Lenny and Jeff, about what we need to get back to. Issues win every single time. That's what people care about. Most people are not paying attention to politics like the four of us do. Most people are very busy with those kitchen table issues, affordability, formula, safety, security, fentanyl. These are the issues that people are talking about. And so people need to take a page out of Ronald Reagan's book. And, I'm going to talk about like, share, and subscribe here. I'm frozen. Okay. Like, share, and subscribe this, because what we need are the candidates who have lost in their primaries to get behind the Republican candidate and stop trying to run as a third party or minor party candidate because they're upset that they didn't get the votes, because all that is continually dividing us. What they need to do is talk about the issues. Leaders in each one of these states, where they're swing states, need to get together with the candidate and say, listen, you must be persuasive. You must get these votes, and you must be about passing or repealing legislation. This is not the time to be toting your own political agenda. And to Jeff's point and all of our points, it's like, I personally don't want to see another radical talking about things that are very finite issues that don't impact us as a whole. We need to get back to that unity.
Well, except that I agree with that, except that that's not what we're seeing out of Pennsylvania in particular. And Pennsylvania as a purple state concerns me, because when you win the nomination for governor and you don't talk about the issues at all, and during the entire primary, you haven't spoken about the issues, but you still won. You won. And if you looked at the exit polls, you look at some of the crosstabs, you won because the voters said, well, Trump said I should vote for him, and Trump endorsed him. That's not a reason to do that.
But that is a reason now, and let's just stay on the Republican side of the aisle for just a second. As conservatives, that's enough in a primary as a Republican these days. And look, let's just be fair. Donald Trump was never a big issue hammering candidate in 2016 or 2020. He was never somebody that people voted for because he had a mastery of the issues. He was somebody that they voted for to shake up the system, because he was going to take it to the system. He was going to drain the swamp, whatever you wanted to say, whatever lexicon or adage you wanted to use. That was why people voted for him. Well, as a kingmaker or a queenmaker, and people found this out with Sarah Palin. And people forget about this. They found this out about Sarah Palin about 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. The traits that some candidates can do for themselves, and heck, they found this out with Barack Obama as well, does not necessarily carry over to the people they're trying to do the blessing for subsequent to that. It doesn't always work. In fact, it usually doesn't work. And even for Barack Obama, who came in as 44th president with a whole bunch of political capital, he couldn't even win the gubernatorial race right down the road in Virginia a year later.
Well, I think that's changing. So real quick. So 2 years ago, Trump endorsed what Meadows and Cawthorn beat him in the primary. And then this year, Trump endorsed Cawthorn and he lost. So I'm not sure if this like people are changing, and we're starting to see that in this particular primary election. I think we're going to see it throughout all of the primaries, that as great of a president that we think Trump was, and his policies were great, and his endorsements did. I said this last week, his endorsements carry a lot of power, but we're starting to see that it's not enough. To Dr. Metzler's argument, people are starting to wake up and say, that's not really what I want. I want someone who's going to bring the issues and have some action, but not be as offensive, because we still care about character. That's what we're starting to see.
Does America really care about character, Jeff? I mean, does America, the Democrat, look, just to be fair, the Democrats went and got Bill Clinton to be one of their keynote speakers at one of their conventions recently. Bill Clinton, if you're trying to get middle America, independents to vote for your party, and you want to say that you're above board with things, you go get Bill Clinton, especially when the Epstein stuff was still out there. He was still alive. This was before he didn't off himself, but he did off himself. So are we really caring about character at this point in time, Jeff? Because I could point to examples on both sides of the aisle where people got elected and people could care less.
Going back decades.
About character, allegation. I mean, yeah, Clinton. I mean, Clinton had all kind of, he had so many skeletons coming out of the closet, you thought it was Michael Jackson in a Thriller video. So there was just stuff. And it's worse. Exactly.
Yeah, no, we don't care about character anymore. We haven't for a while. But what we do care about is personality and manner. So I think one of the reasons, like you take Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's my governor now, one of the reasons why he's so popular is because he has Trump's strengths, but not his weaknesses. With Trump, it was never about character. Nobody cared about character except for the Democrats when they were pretending to care about his character. No, it was his manner. He was abrasive. He offended people. He made a lot of rhetorical mistakes. He said things that he shouldn't have said. He said some things that he should have said. He said things in a way that was very pointed. So that's what people care about. They want a Trumpy-like person that isn't going to give the left as much ammo as Trump did. That's why I think DeSantis, and I'm not saying DeSantis has bad character. I don't know. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that in general, we're not as concerned about character as we tend to say we are.
Is it, and let me ask this before I get us out of here, Priscilla. Is it that people want their candidates, particularly on the conservative side, to be more Trumpy, or do they want somebody that they can feel strongly defends them again? Because Trumpy is a very specific brand. Trumpy is brash. Trumpy is unfiltered. Trumpy is rough around the edges. You could be a fighter for somebody and have all those things in place and look impeccable in a suit or suit pants and speak the King's English. So is it the strength that people want and then they were willing to take the other stuff? Or is it truly having the Trumpy characteristics of, hey, you kind of seem more like me than anybody else?
Well, what did Trump used to say? You think it, I say it. And he said a lot of things that a lot of people felt. And I think people were just sick and tired of politicians and being pushed around. And here comes Trump, who's not a politician. He's not beholden to anybody. In fact, he paid a lot of people a lot of money during their elections. And he's like, I'm gonna change this. And a lot of people like that. When he said to the Black community, what do you have to lose? When he said, I'm about the working people, they responded to that. And yeah, he was tough and people liked it, the fact that he wasn't getting pushed around. And so, yeah, DeSantis is like, I guess, the perfect version of a Trump, where he's strong, he's passing policies that make sense, and he is doing everything, for the most part, from what I see, above board. And but again, he's not, like Jeff said, giving the left a ton of ammunition to argue, because he is representing the people. And so I think the voter, or I can talk for myself, like I want someone like a DeSantis to be a leader who's going to throw some punches and not get bullied around by the left, because that's what we feel like. I feel like a rag doll sometimes. Like every time I wake up and I open the news, the left is passing some crazy legislation that makes no sense and is damaging to the US. So yeah.
Listen, let's get out of here for now. We could talk about this for a while, and I know there's going to still be more developments coming out of Buffalo. There's going to be more aftermath as a result of Buffalo. But we're also going to be doing some recounts in some states, including here in Pennsylvania, and following up on what the primary process is going to look like in a couple of other states, including Georgia, shall we say Georgia, and a few other areas. So we'll get to that. Make sure you check out A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Make sure you check out what Priscilla Ron is doing out in Colorado. Of course, follow Dr. Metzler, who is all up and down the East Coast, because that's what he does. Make sure you like, share, subscribe here on the Red State channel. Follow us on Twitter. Follow Red State as well. And we look forward to talking to you again next week, because we have a lot more to dig into, not just on the topics we talked about this week, but how it's all expanding, because 2022, between baby formula not being available to a war that we still haven't talked about in the last couple of weeks because everything's going on here, to Buffalo and everything else, we're living in some very historic times. And it's our obligation, not just here on Red and Black, but also all of us as Americans, to respond to these historic times the right way. We believe we can count on you. We want to do it together as a big American family and a set of communities going in the right direction. Meanwhile, thank you for joining us as always. We'll talk to you soon. DCNGB. Take care and God bless.
Take care.
Peace.